So we're in the Richard Rohr book called The Naked Now. And last week, part one was, can't remember what the title was, but it was about how a mystic begins to live with paradox. And this week, the lesson was entitled, Practicing Heaven Now. And of course, I have all the lessons planned out way in advance. This has been actually planned since last October. And then life happens. Things happen in the world. And that I get to decide how to show up here on Sunday morning. In the light of what happened last Monday, I think, oh, we're going to go practice heaven at church now. And what does that look like when once again we come together in the wake of another mass murder in our country? 58 people killed by one person with an as yet unknown agenda, with almost 500 more injured. And I know that you know this. And yet, here we are with once again countless lives being shattered by gun violence. Once again, we come face to face in our country with unspeakable tragedy. And once again, our hearts are broken. Those of you who know me know that one of my cornerstones of my personal philosophy is that when faced with a personal challenge, to not ask why me, but to ask what's next, what's mine to do. And yet, like my friend Gordon Kyler, who is pastor of Unity of Joplin, wrote, I find myself asking, why do we keep experiencing this senseless slaughter in our country? Gordon writes, perhaps it is because we as a culture refuse to engage the lesson. Spiritual seekers, psychologists, and medical doctors all agree that when something shows up over and over again in our lives, there is a lesson to be learned. Amen? Amen. And it will keep showing up until we learn the lesson. He goes on. What I'm about to share with you are not opinions. They are verifiable facts. We, as a culture, are among the most violent in the world. As a nation, we have had 222 years of war out of 241 since 1776. There is not one generation of Americans that has not known war. We produce 1.1 million guns per year, and as of 2013, there are over 310 million guns in the U.S. That's more guns than people. We have the highest rate of gun deaths of any developed nation in the world, 29.7 gun deaths per million. The next closest developed country in gun deaths is 7.7 per million. To put that another way, in all the wars the United States has engaged in since 1776, 1.1 million American military have died. Take a breath. Since 1968, 1.5 American civilians have died by guns. Since 1968. Dear church, this is not about the Second Amendment. As a culture, we have an addiction to violence. It is an addiction, an illness that is calling out for healing. And if we are willing to engage in the deeper issues, to let go of labels, to let go of blame, to question our own thoughts, to question our action, we can heal. As a nation, we can heal. I am convinced of this, that we can do this. Our second basic unity principle is that we are made in the image and likeness of God. We are created from and of the divine. And we have the potential to follow the example of Jesus the Christ, who shows us how to perfectly express our divine nature, just as he did, and thus become a beacon of light in the world, a clear conduit for the flow of God's love in the world. I cling to this. Maybe you do too. This spiritual path that we're on, this conscious spiritual path, is a transformative process by which we come to know our unity with the divine. And this is the work that we do. In Eastern Christian orthodoxy, it's called theosis, which is becoming one with God, becoming in union with God, which means that we are called to practice heaven right here and right now, no matter what it looks like in the outer, no matter what it looks like. So we are fully human, as we talked about last week. We are fully human and we are fully divine. I don't know about you, but in these past 7 days, I have not felt so very divine. I have felt pain. I have been despairing. You too, maybe? So, but here we are on this conscious journey of unification, on this conscious journey of theosis. So what do we do now? What do we do now? How do we practice, continue to be warriors? And I use that word intentionally. How do we continue to be warriors for peace, for warriors of love, when every time we turn around, it seems that we are faced with unspeakable tragedy? Well, first, we must be willing to engage in the thought that together we have been complicit. Together, as a culture, as humanity, we have been complicit in our addiction to violence. If not in overt action, in thought, in a culture of us versus them. I was at a volleyball game, my daughter's volleyball game the other night, and there was a woman there who was talking about her ex-husband. And she was talking very off the cuff about how she wanted to see him dead, about how the ways that she thought, she could kill him. She's a nurse. Sitting right next to her mother, like it was a big joke. So for me, that's like, what now? And this is what I'm talking about. Not that we all have ideas about killing or having some other person die, but this is what I'm talking about. When and I didn't say anything, right? What, am I going to turn around and say, that's pretty violent. Do you want to add that violence to the world? I didn't have the nerve to say that, right? So I'm complicit, right? So we are complicit with what we think about, with the movies we see, with what we let our children, our grandchildren consume. We are complicit in this culture of violence. We are complicit every time we have a violent thought about someone or something, whether it's somebody in our personal orbit or whether it's somebody in the government or any corporation in the world. We are complicit in the violence in the world. So, as spiritual warriors, I challenge us to ask ourselves the questions. How is it that I contribute to this culture of violence? And if you're sitting there and thinking, well, she's not talking about me. Yes, I am. Yes, I am. I'm talking about me, and I'm talking about you. How do we contribute to the culture of violence? Who do we see as our enemy? Who would I keep out of the circle of divine love? If there's anybody that you would, then you're complicit. And then, as we engage those questions, not just once, but every day, every moment, if necessary, as we engage in those questions, what's next is to remember who we are at depth, what we are made of and from, and how we are called to serve in the world. Because it's us. Make no mistake about it. It's not that woman in the gymnasium at the volleyball game. At least she doesn't know it's her. It's us. It's those of you who are on this conscious spiritual path. You have a responsibility. Richard Rohr writes, "We are always and forever the conduits, the instruments, the tuning forks for God. we slowly learn the right frequencies that pick up the signal. And he says, the core task of all good spirituality is to teach us to cooperate with God. The core task of all spirituality is to teach us to cooperate with God. So what does that mean? How do we cooperate with God? For me, another foundational teaching in my philosophy is that in every single moment, we have a choice. We always, always, always have a choice. And in this instance, for me, what it looks like is to know that I have a choice about what to do with my pain and my fear and my despair. I have a choice. I can turn away from it. I can numb myself, or I can partner with Spirit and begin to be open to what is mine to do in this world of ours. Pain leads to despair or to action, depending on our perception of our ability to be transformed and to be a conduit of transformation. So I ask you to ask yourselves that question. Do you really believe that you can be transformed? And whatever needs healing in you, can you be transformed? Because if the answer to that is yes, then that's a place of power. But if we believe that we can be transformed at depth, we believe that everybody in the world can be transformed at depth. Right? If we feel like our challenges are beyond repair, then we feel despair. If we think we have the power to change the world, we go about doing just that, changing the world. Author and social activist Grace Lee Boggs said this: "You cannot change any society unless you take responsibility for it, unless you see yourself as belonging to it and responsible for changing it." There's one word in there I want to highlight, and that's the word belonging. If there is any part of the world that you see yourself outside of, you don't think that you belong, we can't change it. So when I say that, I don't mean that you have to think you belong to a group of people who are against everything you believe in. However, I encourage you to think of those people that you would put outside of the circle as belonging, as worthy, as divine, just like you are, wholly human and wholly divine. We are called to not cast anybody out of that circle of belonging, including ourselves. Each of us, every single one of us, individually, and all of us together, in cooperation with every other existing individual, is responsible for what the future is, for what the next moment is. We have a choice to choose to make decisions that will bring us closer to heaven or further away from it. Closer to heaven or further away from it. We can blame others, or we can remember that we are made in the image and likeness of God, the image of light and the likeness of love. So, what's next? Taking action is what's next. This is our fifth basic unity principle, which says knowledge of spiritual principles is not enough. We must live them. We must live them. Have you ever wanted your life to change or the world to change, but you didn't want to do anything to make it happen? Right? That's when, I don't know if for those of you who are on social media, and this may have come across your awareness, people are writing and saying, "I'm tired of hearing your thoughts and prayers are with us." Thoughts and prayers doesn't seem to have changed anything much. Thoughts and prayers are wonderful, and they're a powerful tool, and they need to be coupled with action. It's not enough to believe or to hope or to worship, remembering that our way shower, Jesus the Christ, had never said, worship me. He said, follow me. Do what I do. So we cannot just think and believe these things. We have to put them into practice. Somebody once said, your true religion is not what you say, it's what you do. Are we breathing? Buddhist teacher Jack Kornfield recently wrote, sometimes we need to get up, shout out the truth, march, protest, do whatever is necessary to protect our life and the lives of others. The great models of nonviolence, such as Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr., were strategic and skilled in this way, he says. They rallied people, used the courts, broke the law, blocked the way, negotiated, moved forward and back, found allies, and used money, power, shame, speeches, and politics, all to stand up for what was right. But they did not act out of hate and violence. Retaining our own fierce clarity, he says, we too can seek justice, yet do so with a loving heart. Now, I don't know about what your week was like, but once I saw the news, read the headline, I made a conscious decision not to watch any of the images. Right? That was my decision. I've watched images before. I decided this time that I wasn't going to look at the images, that I would read some things and not read others. I don't know if that's the right thing to do, but that's what worked for me this week. That's the choice that we get to make. And some of us may have decided to totally turn our back on it and try not to pay any attention at all and forget that it happened, right? And I'm not here to judge that either. But what I do know for me is that taking action is what changes the world. And I haven't done anything yet but send money. Send money to groups that I agree with and take some action to change the world. So that's what we are called to do, to look into our hearts. That as we practice heaven, as we remember who we truly are at depth, to remember that sitting on the cushion is only the beginning of it. Sitting on the cushion in meditation is only the beginning of it. We must go forward as spiritual warriors, practicing heaven in our lives and in the world by doing something that makes change in the world, that transforms the world. I'm going to end with something that, again, came across my feed from another Unity minister, Erin McCabe at Unity Village, and the author is L.R. Nost. She says this: get up off your knees. Come out of your churches, your mosques, your temples. God can hear your prayers for peace, justice, and hope in this broken world just fine while you're out creating peace, working for justice, and giving hope to this broken world. When are we finally going to realize that humanity is the solution to inhumanity? When will we finally understand that we are all drops of the same ocean, hurting together, healing together, hoping together? So don't just pray for hands to heal the hurting. Pray with hands that are healing the hurting. Don't just pray for arms to help the helpless. Pray with arms that are helping the helpless. Don't just pray for feet to respond to need. Pray on feet that are responding to need. Don't just pray for someone to do something. Be someone who does something. Don't just pray for answers. Be the answers. This is what practicing heaven looks like. May it be true for each and every one of us. Namaste.